Another weekend where certain Republicans and their handlers will be gearing up for another chance to dazzle American voters and not diminish their chances of remaining at the adult table. Time to thin the GOP herd after this one, and some candidates will not go quietly onto the kiddie scene. We're also readying for yet another Donald Trump magic moment, this one on national late-night TV. And one massive voting bloc is ready to bring the protesting hammer. Yet here we have one Latino leader who thinks everyone needs to back off and pay attention to what is really important. It's something we cannot fathom. How anyone could fall for the lies emanating from the mouths of terrorists. Yet young girls continue seeking to become ISIS brides. And there may be nothing we can do to stem the tide. Perhaps we need something a little lighter to send us into the weekend. Maybe a round-headed kid and his beagle will do the trick. Good grief, the psychiatrist is in, and the Red Baron has plenty to fear. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Friday, November 6th, 2015.
Do I think it's time to have some of the other Republican candidates drop out? Yes. There are too many people.
Christie was seen by millions of people this week pleading his case for the proper treatment of addicts in this country. A video that has garnered plenty of attention and kudos from both Republicans and Democrats.
No one came to me and said, hey, listen, your mother was dumb. She started smoking when she was 16. Then after we told her it was bad for her, she kept doing it. So we're not going to give her chemotherapy. We're not going to give her radiation. We're not going to give her any of that stuff. You know why? Because she's getting what she deserves.
She is the senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, Hadley Heath Manning. He is the Democratic strategist and executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party in Texas, J.D. Gins. I want to thank you both for joining us. And Hadley Heath, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Let's start this from a different perspective. If there are people out there who are worthy of becoming president, why should they not be given the opportunity to tell the American people everything that they would do for the country? But I'm also going to go ahead and say, maybe we need to hear a few less voices to understand really what they want to do.
Oh, sure. And I think a lot of Americans share both those sentiments. You know, it's a free country. We like to see the underdogs win. We like to see people of all kinds running for public office, especially the highest office in the land. And this year, surprisingly, shows a lot of favor for those candidates who've never held public office before. So this is a really interesting election. But I would just encourage people to keep in mind that these polls, many of them are national polls. And that's not how we nominate GOP or Democratic candidates for office. National polls are interesting. They show us something. They determine who's going to be on the big stage or who's going to be in the undercard for the debates. But that's not how we nominate. We have a state-by-state nomination process. And interestingly, Christie has seen some success in a recent poll from New Hampshire showing that he's surged there. But I think this video going viral is definitely good for him. I think it's good for the Republican Party to show some empathy and to show that this isn't quite the partisan issue that many people think it is.
J.D., I think that's something that even you on the left can agree as well, because Christie's statements actually has Democrats and Republicans saying it's about time somebody said this out loud about addiction. It has people applauding. He's actually pulled up in some of the New Hampshire polling as well and is doing well. J.D., just from a political standpoint, don't you want the best people there regardless of what these sometimes useless polls have to say?
Sure. Well, I'll start with Christie talking about addiction. And I actually think it links to a bigger issue that a lot of Democrats are actually talking about right now, including President Obama, which is criminal justice reform. A lot of people's lives are ruined because of drugs. A lot of people end up not being able to get jobs because they had a drug addiction in the past and ended up getting convicted of a felony from an era when we were really trying to punish people out of addiction when we really need treatment. Now, I'd say as far as people thinning the herd for the Republican side, it's true we'd go by a state-by-state nomination process, and I do think that's fair. I imagine that a lot of people in the Republican establishment are really hoping that Christie or someone more sensible starts to get some traction, because right now they have a couple of beginners leading the national polls.
But when you look at it, when you say that there's beginners leading the national polls, though, there's got to be a reason for it, J.D. It's not as if everybody has got pixie dust floating over their heads and being told magically you have to vote for somebody or you have to go for them in the polls. There's got to be a reason why people want to see this, and a reason why, be fair, on your side, there are people saying, well, we really could use somebody other than Hillary right now because we want to hear some variety.
Well, sure. I mean, I think in the primary, you listen to primary voters, and right now, the Republican side, it's clear that there's a rejection of government and there's a rejection of actually doing status quo government. So they want to find an outsider. I think on the Democratic side, we do have a fair challenge right now. I think Bernie Sanders is a viable candidate who's running a real campaign against Hillary Clinton, and we're having a real conversation. On the Republican side, I think a lot of Republican voters are looking for something different, and it's clear that they're looking towards people who have never been involved. Now, I guess I'm okay with that because I think people who have never run a campaign at a local level or state level probably are not the most viable candidates at the presidential level. So the Republican Party wants to put that forward. Please do so.
All right. Now, let me come back to you, Hadley. Interesting note in the Washington Post where it talked about the fact that Governor Christie and Governor Mike Huckabee could be relegated to the kiddie debate table. But they also ask, I think, what is a very fair question. Does it really matter? In the time of 24/7, 365 media, the three of us sitting here, other people, video, internet, tweets, does it really make a difference if you're in a debate, especially after some of the discourse we've seen?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think that question is actually bigger than this year. It's really a question about the future of political discussion, political debates. Will network television have as much power in the future, given the easy access to information that
Well, let me say this much,
have
Hadley Heath. Should they have as much power, I think, is a good question.
You mean the networks?
Yes. Should the networks have that kind of power?
Well, you know, what the networks bring to the table is not just the dispersion of information, but it's also usually the funding for a lot of these debates. So money is, of course, a big part of the equation on both sides of the aisle when it comes to politics. And I do believe more people tune in to see those major debates with the contenders who are at the front of the polls, leading in the polls. More people will tune into those. More people will be talking about those debates in the morning, the next day, the next week, than the undercard debate. So I think it is a significant blow to a campaign to be relegated to what might be called the happy hour.
The happy hour, the adult table, the kiddie table, however you want to put it here. So before I move on, let me ask you both a simple question then. Hadley Heath, I'll start with you. We're talking here about thinning the herd. Whom, in your opinion, does not deserve to be on the big stage on Tuesday?
Well, you know, it's interesting because polling tells us about the preferences of primary voters. It tells us about the preferences of people's popularity. Often that goes along with name recognition. But there are certainly some candidates who I would say have been in the undercard debate who have some of the best policy ideas and who have some of the best record when it comes to their time serving in public office. So I wouldn't write anyone off just yet. It's still very early. We maybe have, 90 days until Iowa. That's the beginning of really when the herd will begin to shrink.
So then let me interrupt if I can. Would you then have the field stay as it is right now, have as many people on stage right now until we get to Iowa, then make a decision?
Oh, I would say, in my opinion, there's a handful of people that I think could drop out, and I would not miss them from the field. But if you ask a different Republican voter, they're going to name 5 or 6 different people and have different opinions from what I have to say. So, of course, this is all a part of living in a country with representative government. We have our disagreements about who should lead, but my opinions aren't going to reflect the Republican base or another Republican's opinions necessarily.
All right, J.D., let me take it from another aspect then. From the Democratic side, is there anybody that the Democrats fear or perhaps say, yeah, we'd like to get them out because they really have some good ideas here and they might be somebody who can push us come November?
Well, to me, the clear smart choice for the Republican Party would be Governor Kasich. He's the governor of Ohio, and the Republican Party keeps losing the presidential election as soon as Ohio is filed. And the fact that the Republican primary base doesn't even really want to listen to him is just astounding to me. He's moderate. He's been part of the Congress before. I think he is a very dangerous person in the general election. Fortunately for us, the Republican base doesn't like him, and I don't think he's going to get any traction. If there's anybody I think should just be out of the debate, I think Huckabee needs to go. I don't think he has a viable shot, and I don't think people want him to be a nominee. And I think Lindsey Graham, everyone's had enough of hearing about Lindsey Graham and how much of a commander-in-chief warmonger he really wants to be. He can't catch any traction either. So I'd say those two have to go. And I think it's pretty astounding that the Republican Party seems to be rejecting their most viable choice, in my opinion.
All right, I've only got about 90 seconds left, and I can't get away without at least talking about Donald Trump. You know that we have to do it here. But everybody is now looking towards tomorrow night, Saturday Night Live, the live appearance. J.D., I'll come to you first here. What's your opinion of Trump appearing on Saturday Night Live, and what do you expect him to say?
Well, maybe Saturday Night Live is desperate for the same ratings bump that everybody else is getting. Although I do think Saturday Night Live has been a little more funny lately. I think it's probably a good strategy for him. He is already a TV celebrity, and I think going out and trying to get some crossover appeal to younger people and to people who are not necessarily tuned into CNN, but might be tuned into Saturday Night Live is a good strategy, and I think that probably give a bump to the ratings of that, at least that show.
Hadley Heath, you got to admit, love the man. It doesn't make a difference how you feel about Donald Trump. He's a brilliant marketer. He's a fast learner. He's good on TV. So regardless, you've got to agree that it won't make a difference. You can have all the protesters in the world outside 30 Rock. He is still going to get massive ratings, and it's still going to be a big bump for him. I can only imagine the other Republicans saying, why don't we get a chance to do that? But I could answer back by saying, you guys aren't nearly as funny.
Exactly. Well, SNL disappearing for Donald Trump is two sides of the same coin. You know, on the one hand, it's good to see a politician, especially a Republican, that party tends to be a little more uptight when it comes to appearing on late night television. It's good to see someone who could be relaxed and comedic and not too serious. But then the flip side of that equation is, of course, many people in this country, usually not Republican voters, usually not Donald Trump supporters, do not take him seriously. And so he may be feeding the beast by appearing on a late night comedy show, suggesting that his candidacy isn't really something to take seriously or something to consider as a serious, viable campaign.
I can only imagine what will happen. The protesters will be happy, and Donald Trump will be happy, no matter what happens. Trust us on that. Hadley Heath Manning and J.D. Gins, I want to thank you both for joining us. Thanks so much. And let's ask you now, because Donald Trump is going to be appearing tomorrow night on Saturday Night Live. Not only tell us, but wait a minute, I got a better idea. Tell us what you think after the appearance. Send it to us on email, Facebook, Twitter, and then we're going to talk about it next week, just like everybody else in America. Stay with us. The fastest 60 minutes of news, The Hard Line, will continue.